Welcome, everybody, to the April 25th, 2013 Making Sense Financial Literacy and Economic Education for Pennsylvania Teachers webinar. Thank you so much for taking time this evening to join us. It is a beautiful spring evening, and we're so glad that you could be here tonight to participate in this program. My name is Hillary Hunt, and I'm going to be starting things off with a little webinar overview and instructions. And then we will be moving forward with the program portion of our agenda, National Standards for Financial Literacy from Andrew Hill, How to Protect Your Personal Information from Susan Sharkey, and then the Federal Reserve and You, also from Dr. Andrew Hill. And then I will wrap things up with a few announcements and some other information at the end. So let's just talk a little bit about this webinar and give you a little bit of the background behind it. This webinar is provided as a partnership between the Pennsylvania Department of Education and Penn State University, and as part of a series of financial literacy and economic education initiatives that came about through some legislation a couple of years ago. We've been sending out electronic newsletters, developing a designation program, working on a database of teachers and programs across the state, and a variety of other work that we've been doing in addition to these webinars. It's been very exciting to work on these with the Department of Education and Penn State this past year. The goals of these webinars are three-pronged. We try and provide curriculum resources, so things that you can do or put to use in your classroom right away. Tonight we'll be talking about the Federal Reserve and You, new video that is available as that piece, enhancing content knowledge, so making sure that you have all of the information that you need so that you can turn around and teach it to your students. So tonight Susan Sharkey will be talking about protecting personal information, something that hopefully all of you will find beneficial in your own lives, as well as being able to turn around and relay that information to your students. And finally, the third prong is the professional information. And so tonight we're actually going to start with that as we talk about the brand new National Standards in Financial Literacy from the Council for Economic Education. So that's sort of our three pieces of our program tonight. Everybody who's logged on for the entirety of the program will receive Act 48 credit. You do have to stay logged on, and I will be giving you a link at the end so that you can receive that credit. Please do allow at least 6 to 8 weeks for the processing. It does sometimes take that long on the Department of Ed side to offer that or get that through their system. So please do allow that amount of time in order to have that processed. We have several partners in this that I just wanted to acknowledge and thank for their participation in the program. Sally Flaherty is the Social Studies Advisor at the Pennsylvania Department of Education. Mary Rosenkrantz is Director of Financial Education at the Pennsylvania Department of Banking and Securities. And finally, joining us tonight also is Kathy Bowen, Professor at Penn State University, who's the lead on this project from Penn State's end. So thank you to those three ladies for being great partners in this project. And now, without any further ado, I will move things along to the program part of our webinar tonight, the National Standards for Financial Literacy with Dr. Andrew Hill. Andrew is the Economic Education Advisor with the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, and it's great to have him not only as a wonderful resource and part of our team really here in Pennsylvania on financial literacy, but Andrew is very well recognized in national circles and was as you'll see as he talks and shares slides, critical in the development of these new national standards for financial literacy that were just released this month from the Council for Economic Education. So, Andrew, I'm going to turn things over to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Hillary. I'm really excited about the opportunity to be able to speak to everybody about the national standards for financial literacy. These are brand new. They were just released on the 1st of April. Actually, both projects I'm talking about tonight were released on the 1st of April. So these are brand new things that I want to give everybody some overview on. So this new set of standards was produced, as Hillary said, by the Council for Economic Education in New York, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about how they came about, why we worked on this project, and I'm going to give you a little description as to how these standards differ from other types of standards, what we think the strengths are in these standards, and what the process was all about as we went through and actually did the work to put these together. So as of 2011, there were a number of standards that existed out there for personal finance. So one of the things that people often talked about is that personal finance doesn't necessarily have a home. I'm sure that different people that are on this webinar tonight teach in different subject areas, and there's been a lot of organizations that have been interested in personal financial education, that advocate for personal financial education, and in one way or the other, these different organizations have over time put together a set of standards. Now, as many of you know, I come at the teaching of personal finance from the economic education side. So to me, as an economist, personal financial education is a part of economic education overall. So it's the application of economic thinking to our own personal lives and our own personal decision making around financial issues. So I think most famously is the Jumpstart Coalition standards. They've been around for many years. They are now in their third edition, which was completed in 2007, and those are called the National Standards in K-12 Personal Finance Education. So they've been around for many years. The OECD, through their Child and Youth Finance International work, has also produced a set of competencies that are out there. The Department of Treasury, principally through the President's Advisory Council on Financial Capability, produced a set of money milestones. There are core competencies that exist around personal financial education. And then the individual states, and by the way, these slides I sort of borrowed from a joint presentation that everybody that was on the writing committee did a few months ago. We highlighted there talking about the fact that Wisconsin has a set of state standards, but 43 others do as well. Now, states like Pennsylvania oftentimes don't have those personal finance standards as we would call them standalone standards. And by that, what I mean by standalone state standard or standards would be where you can actually go to the Department of Education's website in that state and find a document that says something like academic content standards for personal finance. Of course, in Pennsylvania, the personal finance standards, we find personal finance content in the standards in a number of different disciplines: economics, family and consumer sciences, career education and work. Those types of standards all have personal finance benchmarks in them. But we in Pennsylvania do not have a set of standalone personal finance standards. But nonetheless, there are a lot of different standards documents out there. Let's talk about how we brought about how this set of standards came about, and why we did them, and why a new set of standards. So the discussion for this actually started at a meeting of economic educators, economic education researchers, that took place at the St. Louis Federal Reserve Bank in April of 2011. And this was a meeting that was joint sponsored by the St. Louis Fed and the Council for Economic Education in New York. And so a lot of these folks were college and university faculty who are engaged in doing research in K-12 economic education, who also are engaged in training teachers to teach economics and personal finance. It also included some Federal Reserve colleagues, and of course I was there as well as part of that. And one of the things that we talked about is the fact that we need to be doing more assessment of students, more measurement, more research into what works in terms of personal financial education. And we want to be able to come at that from this economic way of thinking perspective for personal financial education. So one of the things that was discussed in that meeting was that research into the effectiveness of personal financial education requires that we have strong, what we call nationally normed assessment items. So by that we mean we want to have test questions that were written at the very highest level of assessment standards or qualifications. If you've ever been involved in writing test questions, whether it be for a state level test or a national type of assessment, or maybe even something that you did at your school level, it can be an extremely tedious and long process. There's a lot of things to consider when writing, whether it be an open response type question or a multiple choice type question. I certainly think that over the years, as I've worked on these types of projects, my eyes have really been opened to what makes a good question, and how to write a question that's going to really get at and measure effectively whether a student understands a certain knowledge fact that needs to be out there. The other thing about tests is it's not just good enough to have a good test and to give that to our students locally. We want to be able to have a test where we can know how our own students compare to a national norm. So what is the mean that could be expected from a representative sample of students nationwide? So this gets into a lot of technical aspects of statistics and how we do measurement in education, but nonetheless, we want to be able to have these types of tests, these types of assessments that could be used by many different people across the country to do assessment as part of research projects into the effectiveness of personal financial education. Now, the development of good assessments requires that we have what we call good standards. They need to be written with the same level of rigor as the assessment items are. Because in order to write the good assessment item, you have to have good benchmarks that very specifically state what kind of knowledge you're expecting the student to be able to exhibit, and then you write the assessment item to go along with that. Now, the existing standards that were out there, a lot of them are performance indicators, and they're not what we would call academic content standards. So an academic content standard is really saying what is the kernel of knowledge, at least at the benchmark level, what is the kernel of knowledge that we expect students to know by the end of fourth grade, eighth grade, 12th grade? That's the grade breakdown that we have in our standards. Rather, they were largely performance indicators. So by a performance indicator, I'm saying something where the student is indicating that they can do something. You might think there's a lot of semantics here, and there's some fine lines between content standards. Sometimes the line doesn't look very clear necessarily, but there's also a lot of fuzzy lines between things like competencies and performance indicators, and those things are sometimes out there. We want students to be able to show over the long run that they have the competency to be financially savvy. That is important. But one of the things we want to do in order to get students to be able to exhibit those competencies is that they have to have certain kernels of knowledge that they're going to learn about in various ways, obviously, in the classroom. A lot of the standards that are out there, a lot of the types of documents that are out there, and you see this in state standards, you see this in various national standards, and even as we were writing this process, going through the process of writing these standards, these types of things sometimes creep in and you don't even realize you're writing it. We don't want to be saying should. We don't want to be having value-laden words in there. Things like students should be able to list appropriate investments. Well, what's an appropriate investment? We don't want to be saying to students, we don't want to be putting values into these standards. They should be knowledge-based standards that are based on widely accepted research into what students we expect the students should know. So some of them also had concepts in them that from the perspectives of economic theory were not accurate. So as economists, we have a lot of economic theory that's been established over many decades that undergirds economic thinking. So things like preference theory, how consumers behave, how businesses interact with consumers, all those types of things. One of the ones that pops up all the time is needs versus wants. And so you'll hear, if some of you have heard me speak live, you'll hear me talk about that needs versus wants is a very difficult concept to teach to students oftentimes. I can remember vividly watching a personal finance leader in another state doing an activity with students, and she put a group of high school students, it was about 55 of them, she was extremely brave, and she put them up on the stage in this auditorium, and she said, if you believe that a cell phone is a need, go to the left-hand side of the stage. If you believe that a cell phone is a want, go to the right-hand side of the stage. And I always ask teachers when I talk about this, what do you think happened? And a lot of people think that the students all ran to the need side. That's not what happened. What happened is the students stood in the middle of the room of the stage and asked her questions. And the whole activity sort of broke down. They were asking her questions about, well, should I assume that I have a child? Should I assume that I have a job? Should I assume that I commute to work? What age am I? What age should I assume? And what really was going on there is that we want to be asking our students to do higher order thinking, where they will prioritize, where they will prioritize from a set of wants. So there were some economic theory problems that were there, and I could spend a lot more time on that, but I don't have enough time to talk about all those types of issues. But the other thing that was very clear to us as we looked at these standards, and folks had worked with these over time, is it was difficult to write questions based on a lot of the standards that were out there. And since one of our purposes for doing this, not all of our purpose, but one of our purpose was to write strong assessment items, we needed to have benchmarks that related to the standards that we were to write. Those benchmarks need to be clearly written so that we can write clear assessment items. The other thing that was a frustration for many of us is that we oftentimes are writing lessons in economic education where we want to be able to have both economic concepts, so concepts that, like the ones that are exhibited in the 20 voluntary national standards. So we have a document that you can go out and look for called the Voluntary National Standards in Economics. But we also, in the same lesson, want to be able to be talking about some personal finance relating topics. So saving might be one of them. And when we were doing that, we would oftentimes be producing curriculum materials that were where the standards were difficult to work with. This other standards that were written by other groups, other fields other than economic education, didn't always mesh with what we had for our economic standards. So this was a long-standing problem for us as economic educators. Is we had done a great job of producing economic standards, but we didn't have corresponding personal finance standards that would mesh with those. There was a lot of discussion over the last few years when the economic standards were rewritten about just putting personal finance standards into the economic standards. We didn't decide as a field to go in that direction, and I'm grateful for that because I think it's important for these to stand separately. So it oftentimes was very difficult to cite the standards and to get things to line up the way that we wanted to. And you can imagine this if you're in a field and you have a set of standards that you're used to working with and that are written in a certain way, to have to then meld those with standards that come from a different field could be very difficult. So this was taken on as a project of the Council for Economic Education in New York, formerly the National Council for Economic Education. The writing committee worked for over a year. We prepared drafts, we worked individually, and we also worked together in in-person meetings. We had a number of in-person meetings for this. We would go and work all weekend on this. By this, the way this is weekend work. We made several presentations to outside groups in order to get feedback on these. These were very heavily vetted, and I'll talk a little bit more about the vetting process in a minute, but we met or presented at the National Association of School Boards, the National Association of Economic Educators, the Association of Economic Educators. So they were presented a number of times to get feedback. And we had a number of review committees. We had a national review committee, which you might consider a blue ribbon panel. We had economic and financial educators who are our counterparts at other universities, colleges, and Federal Reserve banks around the country who provided feedback. And then we also had teacher review committee who gave feedback. And all those comments and feedback were incorporated into this. So this was a very intense process. It took a long time and it was a tremendous amount of work. But I think we're I shouldn't say I think, we are extremely proud of the results. And we think that we have a document that's very well able to be used by many different groups. So this is the writing committee, and I won't read off all those names. I was very lucky to be able to be a part of this committee when I first joined the field of economic education. I never expected that I'd have the opportunity to be able to work on a project like this. So I was very grateful, and I was my counterparts on the writing committee were extremely well qualified, and it was a tremendous honor to be able to work on this. The National Review Committee included Gene Hogarth, who was at the time at the Federal Reserve Board, Anna Maria Lazardi, who's at George Washington University and a preeminent authority in personal finance, Bridget Madrian, who's a behavioral economist at Harvard University, Peter Rousseau, who's the Secretary Treasurer of the American Economic Association, and Mark Zandi, a macroeconomist at Moody's Analytics in Westchester, was also on that. We had a group of colleagues, as I said, who were within the National Association of Economic Educators network who provided feedback, and then some teachers from across the country who also provided feedback, and these teachers were in 6 different states. I'm not going to read this to you. All I want to say about this is that Chairman Bernanke mentioned our work on this back when he did a online virtual town hall with teachers back in August of 2012. Looking at the Financial Literacy and Education Commission, the National Commission's core competencies, those are listed here in the table on the left column. The right hand column are our new national standards for financial literacy, and you'll see that they dovetail very well. The only thing that we did differently in terms of these overarching competencies, the overarching core ideas, was that we broke out saving and investing, which they have. We decided that it was important to break that into two separate standards. And that was because there's a tremendous amount that's obviously important in this topic, and we wanted to make sure that we highlighted the importance of those as much as possible. So here's a little graphic organizer just to explain. We wanted personal finance standards that were accessible. We wanted them to be economic content based. So when we're talking about that, we're talking about the economic way of thinking, which if you were on the March Making Sense webinar, I talked about the economic way of thinking. So this is the idea that people make choices. We're making choices all the time. Those choices have costs and benefits. They have consequences that lie in the future. People respond to incentives. That type of thinking we wanted to make sure was heavily embedded in these standards that we were producing. And that's because that lack of that economic way of thinking in existing standards was one of the reasons why we wanted to do these in the first place. That we wanted to present in a document our thinking around personal finance as the economic, as a part or in the light of the economic way of thinking. We wanted them to provide information, so we wanted them to be information based. We wanted them to include capabilities, but we wanted that to be secondary to the knowledge-based content. And we wanted them to be comprehensive. We wanted these to cover everything that we feel is the sort of picture of what personal finance is from the economic way of thinking. So the goal then, or the objectives then, were for better curriculum development and alignment. We wanted to be able to provide a document that would help to inform better teaching, and clearly, as I've already mentioned, a document that would help in the development of high quality standards aligned assessment. So assessment that would be standards aligned and of high quality. I'm not going to read these to you. I'm just going to talk about the basics of why they're important. I'm going to talk about and one of the things you'll notice is that in each of these standards, so this is the overarching standard statement, and then there's benchmarks that fall from those or that are associated with those, and I'll talk briefly about the benchmarks in a minute. But you'll notice that we've highlighted one word in each and every one of these standards. And by the way, just writing the standards, the 6 standard statements, took us a full weekend. And you think, wow, they must not have been working very fast or very hard. This is an agonizing process to put a writing committee together and to spend the time wordsmithing this, because it had to be our very, very best work, and we spent a lot of time on making sure that this was right, because based on these standards then we would develop the benchmarks, which was sort of in many ways the meat or the working rubber meets the road part of the standards. So you notice here the word choosing. So we're emphasizing throughout these standards the importance of decision making and good decision making, and emphasizing the fact that life and economic decisions, personal finance decisions, are about making choices. And clearly we're trying throughout all of our personal finance efforts to create a new generation, the next generation of good decision makers. So here we have people can increase their income and job opportunities by choosing to acquire more education, work experience, and job skills. There's certainly more to that statement there, the standard statement, than what I read. Here we're talking about buying goods and services, so I'll leave this linger up here. But again, people choose to buy goods and services, to buy some of them and not to buy others. So people are making spending decisions. Saving, people choose to put away some of their income, part of their income, for future consumption. So here again, I don't think there's anything in these standards that isn't what we all would agree with are important topics. Okay, so one of the things I want to emphasize to you is that this set of standards, in many ways, you might read through these and say, well, this isn't tremendously different than what I'm already doing in the classroom, and that's a good thing. There's nothing in here that's particularly shocking. It's all really at the core of what we all believe is important in terms of personal financial education, but it's about the perspective from which it comes from, and that perspective is about having good decision makers. I often tell teachers, I think if we were graduating um, high school seniors who all were able to be good decision makers, we would be a long way to solving our personal financial literacy issues in the United States. And that process of making good decisions involves gathering information, evaluating it well, evaluating costs and benefits, and we could solve a lot of issues by just having really good decision makers. And that's what this set of standards really expresses. Here we are in terms of using credit. So again, you see that word choose right there in the middle. Obviously, we would expect, and this is important. This is an important standard within here, within the set of standards, is making sure that students are getting a good understanding of how to use credit wisely. Financial investing is really important. So this one I talked about before, we pulled this out. So it's not just about saving, but it's also about how do you invest those savings over time. And then finally, obviously, it's very important to talk about protecting and insuring, and this includes all kinds of things from consumer protection to the use of insurance, etc. And here we were getting again at this idea about people choosing to accept risk, reduce risk, or transfer the risk, because again, from an economist's perspective, there are costs and benefits associated with any decision around how much risk you're going to take on, etc. So clearly, it's not about just buy as much insurance as you possibly can. It's about making an economic decision that's based on costs and benefits as to how much insurance you yourself want for your own situation. So some characteristics. They're grounded in economics. I already talked about that. They're fused with this economic decision making. They include examples of decisions people make in their daily lives. Now that's not in the standard statement that I just showed you, but there's a lot more to this document than what I'm able to show you today in the PowerPoint. I will give you the URL to go and actually download the document yourself, and you can read it on your own, and there's lots of pieces to it. But one of the things we wanted to do is to include examples of decisions that people make related to those 6 standards topics. And of course, we have benchmarks, and those benchmarks reflect the thinking of behavioral economists in addition to a lot of other areas. And this was a real innovation. Behavioral economics has come a long way. It's a relatively burgeoning part of the field of economics. And so this is people who look at how do people behave when presented with economic decisions. And a classic one of these is if I ask you to give $1 a day to help a charity, or I ask you to give $30 a month, people will respond differently depending on how that's presented. And so those are the types of kinds of things that behavioral economists look at. And we wanted to include that type of thinking and knowledge in there. Benchmarks, we wanted them to be more than just a recitation of facts. So if you think about this in terms of Bloom's taxonomy, we're talking here about expressing the idea that students are going to know more than just basic facts and low-level Bloom's taxonomy stuff. They're going to be able to do the higher order types of things and evaluate to synthesize, and what kinds of knowledge is there that's needed. So it's not just make sure you know a bunch of facts, it's also about the knowledge of how to do things and deeper understanding that's needed to be there. So benchmarks are always the building blocks here. They're the underlying principles that are embedded within the standards document. There are 144 benchmarks in the total document. That's an average of 24 per standard. There are benchmarks that are expected at the end of grade 4. So students between K to 4, by the end of grade 4, they will have a knowledge of the various things that are in those benchmarks, middle school benchmarks that are placed at grade 8, and then high school benchmarks at grade 12. And each benchmark has two parts. It has the knowledge-based side, so that's on the left, and I'll show you a little schematic of how it's organized, and then how the students will use the knowledge. And if you look at those, sometimes I call them performance indicators. They're actually pretty good authentic assessment items that ask students to be able to exhibit skills related to personal financial education, skills that actually come right out of the Common Core as well, that they exhibit their understanding of the knowledge in various ways, and they're great for assessment items. The benchmarks include examples of financial decisions that people make in their daily lives. So we have lists of those types of examples or types of decisions that people might make, questions that people might have to answer in their daily lives. So the way that they're organized, at the top there's the overarching statement of the standard, and I already showed you those. Then we included a concept progression. One of the things we really wanted to do is to emphasize the fact that each of those 6 concepts, saving, investing, earning income, etc., we want those to be a progression, a K to 12 progression. There I showed you here, or there you see at the bottom a table that shows exactly what I was talking about. That on the left-hand side is the benchmark. That's what the students will understand. And then on the right-hand side is an example of how the students might demonstrate that understanding to you in an authentic type assessment item. We have narratives about the decision making that is involved, and so we talk about what kinds of decisions might be made in each of those 6 areas that are covered by the standards. We talk about planning and goal setting, so what kind of planning and goal setting might take place, for instance, around decisions for saving, then about how people make those decisions by weighing costs and benefits, and then how they assess the outcomes of those decisions. And we give examples of other topic related choices that might come up, so that as a teacher you can share then those types of questions with students about how might somebody decide how much to save for retirement, or how much to save to go to college, etc. That's just an example. So who are going to use these standards? Well, we want teachers to use these as a guide for what should be taught to students. So this is the very best thought leaders we can put together in our field. We did due diligence to try to make sure we got as many quality responses and feedback from as many people as possible. So this is my field's very best expression as to what we think should be taught to students in terms of personal finance. We hope that school administrators will use this for reviewing their curricula, that curriculum writers, and as somebody who writes lessons for teachers, I know I will be using these standards extensively for preparing educational material. We'll be entering into a process of re-benchmarking all of our materials that we have for personal finance to this new set of standards. Certainly, we already talked about this, that test developers and researchers will use this for assessing student learning and for evaluating long-term outcomes. So this is just the tip of the iceberg about these standards, and I really encourage you, if you have a chance, to read the standards document. I'm actually in the box at the bottom, the text chat at the bottom. I just gave you the link to the standards document. It's relatively easy to remember. It's at councilforeconeed.org/national standards for financial literacy, with the dashes there between the words. So take a chance to take an opportunity and read the document. Reading standards can sometimes be a boring activity, but go ahead and do it, because we really appreciate the opportunity to provide this out there to the world at large, to the educational community at large, and we think it's our best expression of what we as economic educators think is important in teaching kids personal finance. So maybe I have a minute for a question, Hillary?
Sure.
So are there any questions that I can answer about these new standards? Why we did them? Why we produced them? Okay, doesn't look like any questions at this point, Hillary. So I'll pass it back to you.
All right, very good. Thank you, Andrew. And if you have another question, Andrew's going to stay on because he will be presenting again in a few minutes. If you have another thought or something comes up that you want to post there in the text chat, feel free to do so. Next up on our agenda, we have Susan Sharkey joining us from the National Endowment for Financial Education in Denver, Colorado. Susan, thank you so much for being with us to talk about protecting your personal information. Sounds good on my end.
You're welcome. I guess it would help if I turn my volume up, right? Is this volume okay, Hillary? Okay. Well, thank you, people. As many of you know, fraud, scam artists, email issues are a problem right now. We're going to focus mainly on identity theft. There's far too much to cover, but I hope that I will leave you with some ideas of why this is an issue to discuss not only for yourself, but in your family, with your friends and your students, but then offer you ideas and tips on how you can protect yourself and what you should be sharing with your students. When Hillary sent out the information for this webinar, she did provide you with a handout that has some other resources that you can tap into if you're interested in this or when you need to wrap your head around it. So you do have another one pager with several other quality and trustworthy resources as well. But for starters, to take a little break, this is interactive. I am going to give you 1 minute to answer a question for me, and without looking in your wallet, without looking in your purse, you need a pen or pencil in hand. I'm going to put a list of items on the screen here, and in 45 seconds or so, just please give yourself a point for each of these items that you recall that is right now in your wallet or in your purse. So 45 seconds, let's see what you have. Give yourself 1 point for each of those. Hillary, did you change yours from the previous webinar? Okay, 10 more seconds. If you would like to share, go ahead, put your number up, but you do not have to share your number. You can put your number in the chat. But as you look at this list, I think many of us have, I'm guessing we have car keys, perhaps not in our wallet, but in our purse. We have our cell phone, we have our driver's license. But this is the type of item that the lower your score is, the better you are, similar to golf. The fewer items you have in your wallet that have personal information, the better you are, or the less chance you have for some type of identity theft. As I show a little bit later, people still get your information the old-fashioned way, and they can get a lot of information from your wallet or purse. So I'm going to caution you on a few items, but in particular, if you see we had computer passwords, you have them written down, you might think you're being sneaky, but someone could figure that out if they're looking for it. Your ID card with a photo, you may need it for work, but if you're traveling to Europe or someplace else, I would leave that behind. So if you don't need it, don't take it with you. Well, let's just take a little peek here at some of the statistics that might be of interest to you to show you that this is a problem. It is something you need to be aware of, and you can see this towards the bottom. The Javelin Strategy and Research is an organization that gathers fraud type information mainly for financial institutions, but you can also Google their information. Some of this is public, some you'll have to pay for, but it's information that we check out every once in a while to see what the current statistics are. So based on a few years, you can see women are 26, oh, I should say percent, I'm sorry, 26% more likely to be victims than men. I don't have an explanation for that. I can make some guesses, but I won't take our time here. But the two items that I found particularly interesting were the amount of time people spend resolving issues. That's time that could be spent somewhere else. It's 33 hours on average. If I only spent an hour or so recently correcting a charge on my credit card, that means someone else spent over 70 hours. To me, that's very convenient, and I'd be downright angry if that happened to me. So that's not even the money. And then the other item that I found this week as I was preparing, or in the past week as I was preparing for this, one incident happens every 3 seconds in the U.S. That was a statistic from last year. The figures have dramatically jumped in the last 2 to 3 years, so this is a problem. And then, as you can see, in 2010, there were 9,000 complaints filed, fraud complaints filed just in your state. Denver, which is where I'm located, is not proud to be number one in identity fraud. And Hillary, I think, did you say it was Pennsylvania's number 19? You found that number? That's still not something to be proud of, so we need to resolve that. So I'm hoping you can help be part of the solution here. As you know, we have many people out there who make it their business to rip other people off. And I am sad to say that they're using skills that could have been used for something more useful, but they would rather use it to take our information and use it in a manner that's not pleasant for us. If you look at that last bullet, it's not a matter of when you're a victim, it's going to be if. I know when I lived in Houston a few years. When I first moved there, I was shocked that my auto insurance premium was 3 times what I had paid in Wisconsin. And I was told the statistics in Houston were that your car will be broken into, stolen, or you will have a car accident within 12 months. And that's a statistic that's out there, and now you can see that it's just a matter of time before you become a victim of identity fraud. I was at NBEA last week, and one day I talked to 4 people who had had issues, 2 on their way out to the conference. So these are people who also know how to protect themselves. So it's very real. I don't want to scare you to death, but there are some things you can do. Just to clarify the difference, identity theft is literally when someone steals your personal information. They might do that through stealing your wallet, those items that were on that list. They can get information off your driver's license, obviously, your address. If you have your social security card in your wallet, they literally have your identity right there. They can do a whole host of things with that number right there, or if your children's number. They can hack into electronic files, etc. People do go through the trash and get information from your garbage. If you have some forms or account information that you throw away, people will look for it, and that's a job that they do. They look for that information. Identity fraud then is what they do with the information. They will take on your name, your identity to open new accounts, maybe to clean out your bank accounts, to transfer money, use perhaps your information to commit a crime. I have not seen the new movie out with Melissa, I can't think of the actress's name. I'm anxious to see that, but we've seen several movies about what happens to people, and it can be devastating to folks trying to reclaim their name. It is your job to defend yourself and to prove that you were not the person who was perhaps removing the money from the account, taking on new credit cards, or even committing some kind of a crime. Years ago, the Federal Trade Commission devised a campaign called the Deter, Detect, Defend campaign. You can go on their website, and if this is something you might want to take on as a project in your community, they do have some kits to get you started with this. And I'm just going to walk you through some of these steps because to me it makes sense, and it also is a useful way to introduce this to your students or your own children. Obviously, the best way to prevent identity fraud is to deter people from actually getting our information. In particular, you want to protect those 6 items or 5 items listed there: your social security number, your birth date, any credit card, debit card numbers, bank account information, and your passwords. Hillary asked questions ahead of time, and someone had asked why colleges still ask for social security number. And back when I was teaching high school 100 some years ago, we used that too for the student ID number. High schools don't need to do that, but colleges still do report information to the federal government for taxes, paying tuition, scholarship information. So they'll need that information for tax purposes, but college students now do have a different student ID number for their everyday use. So it's used, but it is not used for all the activities that have been used on campus in the past. Another way, or keep in mind, anything you can do to prevent a theft from opening an account in your name, which someone can do with your address, your name, your social security number. Typically when you open a bank account, you have to show evidence of living somewhere. If they have a copy of an old utility bill, perhaps from your address, and they made an ID with your name, but maybe their picture on it, they could be opening some accounts. It seems like a lot of work, but people do that. So be careful about who's getting your information. A lot of this is common sense. You've heard this. Keep your personal information quiet. Keep it to yourself. Just as we don't advertise to people when we're going on vacations or our house is empty, we also want to keep our personal information very confidential. Lighten up your wallet. Only take what you need. If any of you have had your wallet stolen, you know what it's like to have to replace that information. And you also don't want pictures. We used to carry pictures of our children if something would happen to them, but I don't have their name on it. Just be very careful what's in your wallet and what you're carrying with you, particularly when you're traveling to Europe, because that is a huge place for pickpocketing. And you want to be very careful. When you make a charge for something, I'm thinking at a restaurant, if you don't put in something in the tip section to put on your credit card because you paid the tip in cash, at least cross through it. Make sure you have a mark in there, not applicable, an X, something, so people cannot add something later without your permission. When you're on the website, you're looking for those secure pages, the little padlock and the S behind the HTTP, so HTTPS. If you are placing an order, you should be the one who opened the website, initiated that. I would not respond. If I get an email from Macy's, I'm pretty certain it's them, not positive. I do not go into that website from the email to place an order. I will make sure that I'm going to the account and initiating that contact myself. Shred everything. Anything that has your personal information, your address, account numbers, even those forms that you get requesting that you apply for extra insurance. I have 2 college students. They're getting all those credit card forms now, or requests for life insurance. If it has their name on it at all, they know that goes into the shredder. It does not go into the garbage. Don't leave anything laying around. you don't, imagine someone could even be taping that up. I know of a family that used their shredded paper in their gardens for mulch so it would decompose. That's how serious they were about not having their personal information out for anybody. Be careful with your computer. Keep your virus software up to date. You also have similar types of software protections for your smartphones. Those should be protected as well. If you have a wireless system at home, you might want to check to see what you called it. If you used your family name or your address, anyone who is in your neighborhood nearby looking for a wireless connection can see your name on the list, and someone who is skilled in that could get into what you think is secured and could be used in your account. Don't give them any clues as to whose router it is. Use the package name that came with that. Don't give them a clue. Regarding your smartphones, I need to do more research on that, but it is becoming there are higher incidents of hacking and people getting into this. You should be using the lock feature on your phone, so if your phone is left laying around or lost, it's more challenging for someone to get into your phone. Be very careful what you leave in your notes, what information you have on there. If you're doing any mobile banking, you want to make sure you close out when you're finished. Same on your tablets. Some people don't realize that they're not actually closing out of some of those features on their tablets. So someone could just pick it up at the cafe and read or record your information that if you don't want that read. Something to keep in mind is perhaps only do that work when you're at home on your secured computer. Stay quiet about your personal information, especially on social profiles. One of the places that people get personal information is off Facebook. Many of us have our birth dates up there, and that's information that's often used to open accounts. You also are posting information about family members. So if you used a family member's name, something personal as a security question, maybe here's a time to lie about it. The name of your family pet. If you use that for a security question, but you're talking about spot on Facebook, people have the answer to your security question. At our house, I've asked my children to do this too. We don't put our real city that we live in, and also we don't have our real birth dates. So it really kind of freaks my kids out when they're getting birthday greetings on a month that's not even when their birthday is. But be very careful what you put in those profiles. You don't have to be truthful about all of that information. And even those of us who are listing our universities, etc., people can get a lot of information. Even if you have secured that for friends only, one of your friends might be sharing that information elsewhere. So be the control freak. Be paranoid. Pick a strong password. That password should be at least 8 characters. Use symbols if you can, capitals and lowercase, numbers mixed with letters, and change your passwords. If you can't remember your passwords, I am guilty of that. Have some kind of a pattern so you can rotate through that you'll know what this is, but you should not be writing those down and leaving them near your computer, even putting them on your computer. Someone gets your tablet, it's going to be pretty easy for someone to find that when they know what they're looking for. Stay cautious again about those social networking sites. You know that people are there looking for information. It may seem innocent, but you need to be very careful about what you're handing out. I have friends who purposely do not post travel trip pictures or information until they return home, because here again, they're giving clues that their house is empty, there's no one home, or that they're on the road, they're in a certain location. So be careful what you want people to know. I used to say, my life is so boring, who would want to follow me around? But when I hear the inconvenience people go through, I just don't want to tempt someone. Someone asks to be a friend, you don't know them, you're not certain. Those of us who are teachers, I know we we tend to forget the names of our students, and it could be a former student who's asking to friend us years later. It is okay to ignore those requests. We don't have to worry about offending people if we're not certain, unless they've made direct contact or it's a mutual arrangement from meeting at a restaurant. Just ignore it. You don't need to allow someone into your world. Watch your apps. Make sure if you're planning or considering adding an app to your phone or your tablet, I would do a review first to see if there's anything that pops up that puts up a red flag. Most of the apps that you're familiar with here about have been used and have are legitimate, but do some background work. You have to be your own detective. You are your own advocate. The number one way that people find out about identity fraud is by doing their own legwork and checking their accounts. We are now able to check most of our records online. We don't have to necessarily wait 30 days until something comes in the mail. You need to be checking your billing statements, your accounts. If you don't do it, someone in your family should do that. Make it their job. If you let some of this go beyond the 30 days, 60 days, it becomes much more challenging to find problems. Some of the scam artists will use your information to make small purchases. They're seeing if anything happens, and then they might go with the big purchases. The other strategy is to do some huge purchases all at once, and then they disappear, and it's difficult to catch that as well. So you need to do some checking. The recommendations I also hear, especially if you're on the road traveling, when you get home, you want to verify that there weren't some additional charges you're not aware of. At our house, we have the routine. When someone buys has a transaction, because we have joint accounts, we have a place that we leave our receipts or make a note. So when we do check the billing statements, it's very easy for either one of us to confirm that it was a charge that we had put against a credit card. Sign up for those text message alerts. Most places offer that automatically. This past week I did change my password on Facebook and immediately received an alert from them, and I appreciated that. I knew I did it, obviously, but if someone else was trying to make that adjustment, this would give me an alert to know to go and check it out and verify that it was something I had not authorized. If you have not done checked your credit reports, please do so in the next 24 hours. You have the right to a free credit report from each of the 3 organizations once a year. And at the end of this, I'll have those addresses and how to contact those agencies. But I would make sure that you do that. So to kind of wrap up here, it's your job to defend your good name. The sooner you act, the easier it will be to make the corrections. You still have to prove that it wasn't you or that someone misused your information. That is your job. Document what happened. If you're making several calls to get something corrected, you document everything, who you spoke with, what the amount, what you were doing or not doing. Make sure you let your lenders know if it involves a lender. If it's something that involves a considerable amount of your time, money, consider filing a police report. This helps your case later if you have to make a claim or an insurance claim. So you need to make that decision, but you can file a police report because someone has stolen from you. You should report the fraud to the FTC and also to your Attorney General. This helps them also build a case if there might be multiple situations going on. You're not the only one. So you want to help get to the source of it. If everyone reports, even if you did not reply, or if something did not follow through and you preempted some kind of fraud, I would still report it. This is what I heard from Attorney General up in South Dakota. She indicated this helps them build a case. If they hear from 100 or 1,000 people the same type of situation or incident, they can hopefully get to the bottom of it. You can request a fraud alert if you've had a ding or a situation and you contact one of those credit reporting agencies, they will contact the other two for you. And what they're watching for now is someone, if you know someone took your credit card, they're watching to see if there's some other charges put on there. I also learned that you can freeze your credit reports. We've done this at our house. I'm choosing to do this instead of paying, going to these other agencies. I contact each of the 3 credit reporting companies. It was $10. I could put a freeze on, meaning no one can get into my account without my permission. They won't be able to open another account, so my husband won't be able to either, but we've agreed to do this together. If I want to lift it when I'm maybe looking for a home and considering loans, I can lift the freeze. It will cost me $10 to lift it, but to me, that's a small price to pay rather than having everybody in the world going into my account looking that up. If you want to check your credit report, it is free, it is free, it is free. You will not have to pay for that. Annualcreditreport.com is a place to go that will lead you to each of these 3 other agencies. You can also go directly to those sites. And again, Experian, you can get a free report from Experian every year, a free report from Equifax, from TransUnion, each of those once a year. If you're a credit union member, you can all look on, check those services because often they provide a service to help you get your credit report. And just to wrap up, know that teens are targets too. They don't have credit reports yet, so we can't check that until they're 18. That doesn't mean someone is not using their credit, their social security number. So they need to be very careful, or their parents need to keep track of their social security numbers and who gets that information. I tell my own children when they're applying for jobs, they don't have to put the social security number down until they're actually hired. Then it is needed for tax purposes, but they don't need to be writing it down on every application, as just one example. So shred your information. Get your mail out of the mailbox as soon as possible. If you're sending out bills, I would go to the post office, use the blue boxes or go to the post office. People, especially in larger cities, break into the mailboxes and steal that information. If you feel comfortable, I would do business online. It's less paperwork going through the system, but don't do your online business from a public web internet source. You want to make sure it's secured. You should be doing that at home. We mentioned strong passwords already. Check your reports. So my challenge to you in the next week are these 2 items. First of all, carry out one of these strategies to protect yourself or someone in your family. Check your credit report, change your passwords, clean out your wallet or your purse, but take an action this week. Get a shredder. And second of all, think of something you can do to alert not only your students but family members, friends of the risks of fraud. Let them know the strategies. We're assuming everyone knows what to do, and I'm still amazed when people don't do it. So I offer you these 2 last sites. Again, they are listed on that handout that Hillary sent to you. FTC has a whole section on identity theft, what to do, scam alerts. There are some brochures you can download to get more information. There's just too much that I could not include here today. And then your own Pennsylvania Attorney General has some very nice
Thank you so much,
information.
Susan. We appreciate that.
They'll walk you through
I
filing a
am going
complaint,
to turn things
online or
over
by mail,
next
but also
or back over again.
give you a little information
to
about the
Andrew
types of
Hill to
fraud
talk
beyond
about
identity
their
fraud.
new
And
video,
then,
the
again,
Federal
they have
Reserve
brochures
and
to
you.
download information. That's that.
Thanks, Hillary.
Thank you
As
for
we
sharing, and good
might
luck,
mentioned
and
before, we
be
were,
very safe
had
out there.
2 projects that I was involved in that all were released at the beginning of April. First was our the National Personal Finance Standards that I talked about earlier, but then also this project that I've worked on for a number of years, the Federal Reserve and You. The Federal Reserve System has had a whole series of films about the purposes and functions of the Federal Reserve for many years. The most recent one, before the one I'm about to tell you about, was called The Fed Today, and it was released in the very last year or two of the 90s. So it was quite old. It had an on-screen host named Charles Osgood, who I'm sure many of you remember from his days on CBS. I guess he sometimes is there still. That was a 14-minute film. There were a lot of struggles and challenges with that. One of them is that 14 minutes really is not enough time to tell students, explain to students what it is that the Federal Reserve does. So we've for a long time had a dream of producing a new film for high school students. And then with a secondary audience of the general public. So we were able to we worked for over 3 years on this project, and that is from the inception of being able to say, people here being able to say, go ahead and research what it's going to take to do this, getting the funding, etc. So this new film is called The Federal Reserve and You, and we decided to not produce a linear film, although you can watch it in that way. This is drawing upon what we've learned about the success of programs like or websites like Khan Academy. We wanted a very highly segmented resource that teachers could use in many different ways, segments that they could use in many different ways in many different types of classrooms. So I'm going to give you a little walk through this. Now, clearly one of the challenges is that this technology, this webinar technology, doesn't lend itself to showing clips from the film, which is one of the best ways to talk about it. So I'm going to have to rely upon stills to describe for you what's in the film and to give you a sense of this. And then I'll tell you where you can go to actually view the film online yourself, as well as to order a DVD of it if you would like to have one for your classroom or for at home or for whatever the case may be. So we wanted to make sure that this film was produced at the very highest quality, production quality. So this has been filmed in high definition. We made use of graphics. We also wanted this film to represent the entire Federal Reserve System, so we were able to get tremendous support from reserve banks across the country. As you know, I have 11 colleagues across the country. There are 12 Federal Reserve banks. All of them have Federal Reserve Bank presidents, and many of those presidents we interviewed for this project, as well as Chairman Chairman Bernanke at the Board of Governors in Washington. So we had two great on-screen hosts who we think are very accessible to students. They're young, they're vivacious. So the one on the left, the actor's name is Jimmy Brooks Jr., and on the right is Christine Cartel. And they did a great job of being our own on-screen hosts. But we also had a lot of B-roll that was used in this, and we had some historical vignettes, some scenarios that were acted out by other actors, and the filming was done in the Boston area. One of the cool things is that most of this was shot in front of green screen, and so that room that you see behind Jimmy and Christine there is actually a virtual room. It was created using graphics and then put in there. I think it's pretty cool. Someone told me that they didn't realize that it wasn't a real room, so we're very proud of that. I'm going to show you this or structure this around what it would look like if I was able to have you here live with me and I could show you the folder that the DVD comes in. So this is a little mock-up of that folder. That on the left is supposed to represent where the disc slides into the pocket. So this film project is organized into chapters and then segments within those chapters, and the individual segments are able to be used standalone. So some of the content repeats in this. So if you were to watch it linearly from beginning to end, it's over. I don't recommend doing that. I certainly don't recommend doing that with students. But if you were to watch that, you'd say, well, some of this content repeats, and it's done that intentionally because we know that people might jump into this at various points in the content. They might not start at the beginning, and so we wanted to encourage that. So we want to encourage these segments to be able to be used in lessons in the classroom, or lessons you maybe already have and that you're going to infuse this into. And then we're also going to be producing over the next few months, and it probably will take more than a year to do all of these, 30 or so lessons that'll go along with these segments. So we have a total of 50 some segments in chapters 1 through 7, and then there's an additional 15 segments that are bonus interview footage. We had way more interview footage than we had places for in the original piece, if you will, within the whole context. And so we provided some bonus interview footage. A lot of this is actually of Chairman Bernanke himself, and so I can talk a little bit about that later. So chapter one you can think of as the overview. So remember I talked about that film that came before, The Fed Today. That film was 14 or so minutes. We expanded that out into 23 and a half minutes. And then this is segmented within those 23 and a half minutes. But with this chapter, which we also entitled The Federal Reserve and You, gives you a good understanding of what the Federal Reserve is, gives your students a good understanding of what the Federal Reserve is, the areas in which we operate, etc. We've done a lot of work here at the Philly Fed on the history of central banking in the United States. We wanted to have a strong chapter on that. So if you're teaching social studies and you're teaching U.S. history, there are great ways to make use of this film when you're teaching about the first bank of the United States and Alexander Hamilton, as well as when you're talking about the second bank of the United States, etc. Here's just some stills from the film. These are all stills that I took right from the footage. So this is the Federal Open Market Committee meeting in Washington. This is, of course, the chief monetary policy body in the United States, and it sets the target for the federal funds rate, the interest rate that banks charge each other. We had a great animator for this. Gene has worked with WGBH in Boston for many years, the public television station. He did, for instance, the logo for Nova, the original logo for Nova. And we wanted to have animation that would be timeless. One of the things that we recognize is that this film is going to have to last for a long time. So we didn't want anything that would date the film, that would make it obvious that it was produced in 2012 and released in 2013. And he did a really nice job with that. So there's lots of animations throughout the film. Remember, I was talking to you about those other segments that we filmed. This is to illustrate the use of cash. So the young lady on the left, she buys those sneakers using cash, and so we filmed this specific segment, and there's 8 total of these, some of them historic, some of them in modern times. By the way, that was also shot in front of green screen. That background you see behind them, that is stock photography that we used. So we're very proud of that. I think the quality is excellent. We made use of lots of historical images. So this is the first bank in the United States. This building is here in Philadelphia. Also the second bank of the United States. By the way, if you participate in our Making Sense of Money and Banking course that we offer every summer in the third week in July, and I'll talk about that just briefly at the end here, you get to have a behind-the-scenes special tour that we arrange with the chief curator at Independence Park of these institutions. And we talk about the context of what the Federal Reserve does in the context of the history related to these two institutions. Lots of historic pictures of currency. We talk about the founding of the Federal Reserve System, obviously. One of the things you might know is that the Federal Reserve Act was signed by President Wilson, and that's what this painting illustrates, in 1913. So we're in our 100th year here at the Federal Reserve, and we'll be celebrating that over the next few months. We talk about the Great Depression, we talk about the 1970s, we talk about the financial crisis, the recent financial crisis, and how the Fed and Treasury worked to keep our economy afloat. Chapter 3 was a chapter I really pushed hard for. I wanted to see a significant amount of content here, segments again that would be able to be used to teach about money and banking 101. I believe strongly that in order for students to understand what the Federal Reserve does, they need to understand about money basics and about banking. So how do banks work? How do banks make money? What's fractional reserve banking? What's the difference between money and barter? Those types of topics. And you'll see up there on the upper left, that's a classroom at Cherry Hill High School West, which happens to be my alma mater. I was able to go back and actually teach a class. I did the inflation auction with them, where we auctioned off goods and showed how inflation might come about as a result of money supply growing too quickly. We have a chapter on monetary policy. One of the other key things that we wanted to be able to do is go beyond that overview chapter, chapter 1, and be able to allow teachers to have additional content that if they're teaching an AP economics class or even a general economics class in high school, they need much more details about monetary policy in order to satisfy the requirements, for instance, of the AP exam. And so this gives teachers the ability to drill down further on some of these topics. So monetary policy is one of them. We have animations like this on what is money. This is the functions of money. We have a great vignette. There's two of these, and the same actor played both. Some actors were in both parts, and it's in the same segment. This is the money versus barter segment. So the initial one is he's trying to buy that umbrella from her, and he brings all these different items out of his bag in order to try to barter with her. Of course, he has difficulty. They're not successful in finding a coincidence of wants. And then in the second scene, after Jimmy and Christine have had an opportunity to talk about it a little bit more, then you see him buy a piece of pizza from the same actress using money. And we see how money makes it easier to make those exchanges. We talk about the money supply. We talk about measures of the money supply like M1 and M2. We have all types of great B-roll that show operations at banks like taking out a loan. We talk about excess reserves and required reserves and how that's part of the fractional reserve banking system. Again, there's that great class at Cherry Hill West that we were able to teach. We have drill down chapter on the payment system and the supervision of regulation of banking. And then finally, at the end of the DVD version, and again, this is also available on our website, there's the Baker's Dozen. So these are 13 key questions. I originally thought of these as things that maybe could be played as part of a homeroom television network within your school, but also to be used as lesson starters. So there are all types of topics like what's unemployment, what's the business cycle, what is interest, what do depository institutions do, what's meant by liquidity. We had, as I said, tremendous support from the other reserve banks around the country. This is President Richard Fisher. He's the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. He did an excellent job of describing how the Federal Reserve affects everyone's daily life. That's one of the key themes of this project. Was we want to talk about how what the Federal Reserve does affects people's everyday lives. As I said, Chairman Bernanke was extremely supportive of this project, did a great set of interviews, or I said a great sitting, and answered many questions as part of this interview. We actually finished up early with him, and he asked if we had other questions for him, and he was really great at supporting this project. He's a tremendous supporter of economic and personal financial education, and has been very supportive of our system working group over the years, and certainly of this project. Let me talk a little bit about the formats for this film. It was shot in HD. As you know, to deliver an HD film on disc requires Blu-ray technology. And what we recognize is that teachers do not generally in this country have access to Blu-ray players in most classrooms. So it's available in 720p HD. So you know that that's not the highest high resolution. It's the lower of the high definition versions. But it's available streaming on our website, philadelphiafed.org/thefed. The Federal Reserve and you, with those dashes in between the words. Now, one of the things that we recognize, and I've even had this happen to me as well when I teach my class at Temple. Many of you know I'm an adjunct faculty member at Temple University. Sometimes you have bandwidth curbs that are in place in your institution. You might not have access at all to streaming in your classroom, and so we wanted to be able to have a way of delivering this film to everyone where they could make use of it in most classrooms, if not all classrooms, and that is the SD version, the standard definition version of the film that comes on a DVD in the container that I just described, the folder that I just described. Again, go to that website, philadelphiafed.org / the Federal Reserve and you, and you can order a DVD copy of this film for yourself. It'll come directly from our mailroom. It's available free of charge. This is all available free of charge. And on this same website, going down the pike, is where you'll see those lessons that we're producing. And we have a few of them are very close to being able to be released. So we're working away at those as well. Those lessons will emphasize active and collaborative learning, but also the expectations around the Common Core. So we're looking at having students reading and responding to informational texts and text-based questions that have the proper level of text complexity for high school. One of the best ways to continue to keep up with information about this film project, and this project is one that will live on. It is going to have these lessons that are going to come around. We anticipate that as the years go on, we'll have to update certain segments, and the fact that it's segmented makes it easier to do that. One of the best ways to keep up with that is to go to your Facebook page and like our Facebook page. So it's facebook.com the Federal Reserve and you, and you can go there and like our page. We'll be putting updates there. We have a number of things that are there already, but that'll be an ongoing project. If you use Twitter, you can follow us on Twitter at the Fed and you, and we try to tweet there every day. Right now we're in a process of explaining the different components that are within the various segments of this film. Just to bring you back up to speed, if you were in our webinar last month, or if you're new to, if you just come to this webinar, you didn't get the one last month. We have a number of programs that are coming up that the Philadelphia Fed is offering. We're doing 2 days of programming called High School Personal Finance, and we're doing that in 2 locations. We're doing that in the Reading area at the Crown Plaza, and we're doing that in the Harrisburg area at the Best Western. So we're just finalizing our registration pages now for these programs. Consider joining us for those, and you'll be able to find those next week at philadelphiafed.org/education. So consider signing up for one of those 2 programs, or the same program in one of those 2 locations. We would love to see all of you out this summer for that. If you want to participate in our Keys to Financial Success course, this is our full training for that course. By the way, we will be talking about and providing copies of those resources free along with the registration fee, which is very reasonable at the 2-day program. But if you intend to teach Keys to Financial Success, we really suggest that you come for the 5-day program. This is 30 hours of Act 48. The way to get signed up for this is to contact my colleague Todd.Zartman at phil.frb.org. Contact him directly and say you're interested in this program, Keys to Financial Success, and you'd like to come to that training. Finally, we have I shouldn't say finally, almost finally, we have a week-long program we've been doing for many years. In fact, the Federal Reserve and You film was based largely on the types of content that we cover in this course. It's called Making Sense of Money and Banking. This is a course that, again, is 30 hours of Act 48. It always meets the 3rd week in July here at the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia. Registration is currently open for this program, so you can go out and register right away for this. It's philadelphiafed.org/education to come to Making Sense of Money and Banking. So this comes at, this covers the purposes and functions of the Federal Reserve. It covers money and banking and the history of central banking, and we'd love to see you out. We've trained over 350 teachers over the last almost 10 years with this program, and it's one of the centerpieces of our economic education offerings. And finally, we're going to have 1-day programs again in those locations, Reading and the Best Western Premier in Harrisburg, to talk about the Federal Reserve, to debut many of those lessons. So if you'd like to spend some time with us, a day with us, this is 6.5 hours of Act 48 credit. Again, registration will be up and ready next week for this program, and you can pick from one of those 2 locations. So I hope you'll consider joining us for one of those 2 locations to learn more about the Federal Reserve and You, to see clips from it, and to see how to incorporate it into your own teaching, and to see some of these lessons that we have coming down the pike. And finally, if you want to follow us, our general Twitter feed for our economic education programs is at PhilFedEconEd, or definitely make sure, if you're not already on our distribution list at the Federal Reserve, please email me, andrew.hill@phil.frb.org, and give me your information. I'll make sure that we get you onto our email distribution list so that you find out when our registration opens for different programs and the different types of curriculum resources that we release over time. So I know we're a little short on time here, Hillary. I'm going to pass it back to you, and if anyone has any questions, they can put them in the text chat, and I'll respond there. But in the meantime, I appreciate everybody learning a bit about the Federal Reserve and You. I hope you'll be able to use this in your classroom, that you'll order copies, and let us know how it goes. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Andrew. We appreciate you joining us tonight and sharing information on 2 topics this evening. I do see a question there for you, and I know you'll get that there in the text chat. I do have a couple of announcements before we close this evening. We do have some exciting news to share. In previous webinars, we have talked about two different reports that would be forthcoming, and those have both been released and posted online now. And in the follow-up information that I'm going to send to you after the webinars, you are going to get links to where you can download each of these, but the report of the Pennsylvania Task Force on Economic and Financial Education is now available. That report includes a series of recommendations for the legislature and others to consider, and I would encourage you to take a look at that, give that some consideration, and perhaps share that however you feel might be appropriate. There is also a report from the Pennsylvania Department of Education and the Pennsylvania Department of Banking and Securities on the status of economic and personal finance education. Both of these were required by legislation to be issued concurrently, and so those have come out now and are available. So I would encourage you, when you get those links in my follow-up email, to please download those and spend some time with them at some point. By the way, Andrew, I think your messages aren't going out to everyone here, so if you would make sure that those go to everyone
just
there.
Noticed that.
Thanks, Andrew. All right, now the NAEP economics tests were just released. If you're not familiar with NAEP, it's a national assessment that is done, National Assessment of Educational Progress, that's done periodically on a number of different topics. The economics one was just released I'll also be sending you a link to that. Sort of gives a status of how we are doing as a country in the area of economics. This is high school students that are assessed. And then also we have, following in the great footsteps of the Federal Reserve and many other organizations, the National Endowment for Financial Education and High School Financial Planning Program that joined us earlier, we have established a Facebook page for the Making Sense Project. So if you are a user of Facebook, it's a great way to get updates and information in a real timely fashion. Certainly, I compile things and send them out in those big long e-newsletters or e-blasts that we send out. But if you'd like to be getting things on an ongoing basis, I'd encourage you to find our page on Facebook and like it there. You might also consider adding it to one of your interests to make sure that it shows up in your feed. You can also post questions or share things there as well. So just another way for us to continue to connect as we move forward in this area. We are very hopeful that our project will be ongoing into the next school year. The Department of Education has indicated an interest in that, and hopefully that'll be funded in next year's budget to continue on with these programs. When you get the link for the survey and the evaluation, you'll notice that we do have some questions there asking you about topics for next year's program. So hopefully you'll provide us with some feedback and help us to formulate the series of webinars for next year, because this is our very last one of this school year. A couple of other things that are going on right now, also on Facebook, is you can vote for the Council for Economic Education's Financial Literacy Month video contest. Lots of teachers have submitted videos, and you can check those out, not only to vote, but just to get some great ideas from other educators across the country. There's also an opportunity to go to the New York Stock Exchange and spend some time on the floor, and a great educational program for teachers there. They've extended that deadline actually just today to May 11th. So if that's something that's of interest to you, I'd encourage you to check that out. And in addition to the programs that Andrew's offering, the Family Economics and Financial Education program will be bringing their national training to Maryland this summer, which is relatively close by, just across the southern border in here, not too far away. So other things just to think about and take advantage of. I believe most of you are getting our Making Sense e-blast, but if you're not, please do send me an email and make sure that we are getting that information out to you. All right, thank you so much for participating. I again appreciate it. I know many of you have been on many of these programs, and we really appreciate your participation and involvement in these and helping us to make these a success. I am going to copy and paste here a link for the SurveyMonkey evaluation, as well as the Act 48 form. Please note that when you see this, part of it looks like a hyperlink, but it will not work if you click on it. You need to copy and paste manually so that you get that HTTPS on there. So anyhow, thank you again. I look forward to hopefully participating in a similar series of these with all of you next year. But continue please to be in touch and share any information or ask any questions that you have. We're always interested and willing to be of assistance to you. So thank you so much, everybody, and have a great night.